Now, I have the pleasure of bringing up Flavia Schlegel, as I mentioned before, a good friend of AAAS's, and herself probably one of the most amazing science and medical diplomats that I've had a chance to know in my time. Flavia.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's right here.
Technology.
Yes,
okay. Yes, I'm very happy to be back. Dr. Holt, dear Rush, distinguished speakers, panelists, it's a great pleasure, but it's also an extreme honor for me to be here, one of the opening speakers for this inaugural conference on science diplomacy. And also in the name of Irina Bokova, the Director General of Unesco, I'd like to express our gratitude that AAAS is acknowledging the importance of UNESCO when it comes to science for peace and science diplomacy at work. And dear Juan, dear Tom, it's been a great journey together, and it has started at some point, maybe, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago, and we didn't know by then where would the science diplomacy program go, where would I end up, and I'm very happy to be here and to speak at this inaugural conference, and I hope it's not going to be the last one. I would just like short an outline, a few comments on UNESCO, and then obviously sort of like the science diplomacy importance of institutions, networks, of shared resources, which are very dear also to UNESCO's science portfolio, and then the famous science policy society interface. Just as some thoughts which will underline all my reflections made later in the presentation, but I would not go into detail, but just also to say it is the first science diplomacy conference in the year of the 70th anniversary of UNESCO, which was created just right after the war. And I quote here out of the constitutions, to contribute to peace and to contribute to the understanding of people. And I think this is also all why we are here to discuss today. And I think that's very important, UNESCO as a cross-disciplinary UN agency covering education, culture, and science. Now, talking today and looking ahead in the future, I think there are a few political processes which have to be taken into account, and Dr. Holt had already mentioned COP21. The outcome of COP21, whether legally binding or not, we will see that in Paris in December, will sort of like shape the track, how we have to move forward, how we can move forward in science and policy and science diplomacy. And for us, and this is also, I was already here last week, in New York, post-2015 agenda and the SDGs are really the great political framework where science will play an important role. And just last week, obviously, it was means of implementation, the importance of science and technology when it comes to implementing the SDGs. A next point, which I would just like quickly to mention, because it's also very important to the work at UNESCO, is this notion of inclusive development, of co-production, of collaborative approaches. And this means mainly that also as natural so-called hard scientists, I think we have to accept the fact and work with that there are other knowledge bases out there. We have to talk and we have to co-produce knowledge, for example, with a representative from local and indigenous knowledge, particularly when it comes to climate change. I think it's extremely important to co-produce and to discuss any future activities also in science together with local people or with indigenous people. My last point, just as an introduction, as much as my heart goes into science diplomacy, I think the big overlaying topic is the one of science governance. Who is actually shaping the global science agenda? Who sits at around the table when it comes to define what research should be done on global public goods? Is it just multinationals? Is it also governance? Is it also the vulnerable people, for example, living on sits. So it seems to me when we discuss science diplomacy, we should not lose sort of like the bigger picture of science governance. With this, to UNESCO and its science, just briefly, science, the S in UNESCO is just more than the natural sciences. We have an ADG also for social and human sciences, and obviously also in the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, we have marine and ocean sciences. And now they're a bit far apart here on the slide, but this is not the case in reality. I've just been now in this position for 7 months, and coming from the outside, it looked as if they were all sitting in their separate silos. But now when I look at programs, for example, climate change, disaster risk reduction, then I see that these natural, social, and oceanographic sciences, they work closely together. And the beauty, and this is also why I'm so passionate about UNESCO, it's not only about science, because there is no science without education, and there is no science applied if you cannot tap into a deeply rooted culture in a particular area of the world. This is our current brochure describing what we do in science in UNESCO, and I'm not going to go through this, but I just would like to point out that obviously when we talk about science in UNESCO, it is about excellent science. I mean, the science that we work with, that we have co-produced with our partners has to be excellent, but it also has a means, and it starts with science to empower society. Science we're doing, science we're financing, so well, not so financing so much when I look at our budget issues, which is actually also due to a diplomatic crisis, including the US and UNESCO, going back to 2011 when Palestine became a member state of UNESCO. But still, I mean, it's science to empower society, and as Dr. Holt just said, obviously, there is no empowering of sciences, of a society. There is no building of a safe, inclusive, and also prosperous community if you don't apply science and if you don't have the capacity actually also to absorb the science. And obviously, the wider horizon, it was already opened also by my previous speaker, COP21, SDGs. This all has to be sustainable. This is not just a question of the next election cycle of a president or a minister or whatever. No, this is about the livelihood of the next generations of our children and our grandchildren. Now, when it comes to UNESCO, now also over this last year or so, and I'm getting involved with UNESCO and also talking to our partners, and I must say also just this week now, meeting with very many dear friends and partners here at the US. I think what makes UNESCO unique is it is the only agency which has science in its mandate, and we now have over 70 years of experience in promoting international cooperation in science. We are at the origin in different roles of many institutions such as CERN or IUCN or SESAMI or others, and I see people who can talk better about that than me here in the hall. And we are a host of major established both intergovernmental and international science programs, be it in water or biodiversity or others. And obviously, there is some convening power. We have in our 195 member states, obviously, countries together, sitting together around the table, which usually don't sit around and have a beer together. And I think there is a convening power which also should be leveraged when it comes to looking for solution. And I guess the convening power also depends on our credibility, legitimacy, that we are considered as an honest and a neutral broker, which is particularly when you are in areas which are prone to conflict, quite an asset. Last but not least, obviously, it's our huge networks, be it, our field network, around the globe, be it the chairs, the centers, the World Heritage Sites, and all our scientific and other partners. So all this together, I think, really makes the difference and the power of UNESCO when it comes to science for peace and sustainable development. To institutions, programs and networks, and I'm obviously not going to go into detail, as we also have, I think, a session on institutions and their importance for science diplomacy. But still, when you look at this now, it's a kind of chaotic overview of institutions and partnerships, but it shows, and this is my main point, that UNESCO is connected to very many different areas of science, be it geoscience, be it water science, be it biodiversity, environmental science, it's the whole ocean aspect. But UNESCO is also at the origin, for example, like international basic science programs, and here I also must be honest, is suffering obviously from the budget cut of about 30%. We're not as strong there anymore. And also there we're obviously happy for partnerships. But we are also at the origin of very transversal, multi-sectorial platforms, more innovative approaches, how to do research for the futures, like the IPBS, and I think probably well known to many of you in the room, or also at the origin of Future Earth, where UNESCO, together with ICSU, has the honor to chair the governing council. So you see there are many different institutions and programs, and also many different scientific directions and specificities, but all coming together under one roof of UNESCO. Here now a list, and obviously it's not exhaustive and it's not even chronological, but still I would like to start with CERN. Obviously CERN 1964, yes, I mean this was really, I guess, the first big initiative by UNESCO, obviously becoming independent over time. Last year just celebrating 60th anniversary, but real sort of like the first big institution bringing in a Cold War area, bringing scientists together from all over the world. And from CERN, and again together with the support from UNESCO, the great project in the Middle East, based in Jordan, Sesame, sort of like, I would say it's not really the sister, but it's the daughter of CERN, obviously. And when you look at the countries which are members, Bahrain, Cyprus, Egypt, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Pakistan, Palestine, Jordan, I mean, sometimes you ask, how could these countries manage through the last 10 to 15 years to build up actually this facility? And I was back there a year ago. The roof had collapsed because there was heavy snowfall. Now I'm back and I see Safra Lerman. She was there as well. 2 weeks ago, we were invited by the European Commission also on a conference on science diplomacy. Roof is back up there. I mean, this is really science diplomacy at its best. The US, and here also I would say this is a question for science diplomacy, and I know that Rush Holt was very and hopefully will be very active. US is an observer, but I guess Sesame would be welcoming some support obviously from the US when it comes in further developing Sesame, which should start doing now serious research. And again, this is excellent research. It's comparable to the research in CERN, obviously, should be operational 2016, 2017, I would say. Other examples also in the area, also linked to UNESCO, the Israeli-Palestinian science organizations, where scientists from Israel and Palestine actually have science projects together. I think at the time it's about 3 or 4 working together. Then again, and I look at my friend Safra, the Multi-Conferences Foundation, they will be the topic in a separate session. Also to mention the 2 Category 1 institutes, the Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics, based in in Trieste and UNESCO Institute for Water Education based in Delft. Now, these are really educational institutions which draw people, young people, for master degrees and sometimes also for PhD degrees to Trieste, to Delft, train them, sometimes also in sandwich programs, and these people go back to their countries. And it is actually, I was just in Trieste with ICTP, and it's a rather high percentage, let's say, of brain circulation. So it's not a brain drain, so it's not that these students come from somewhere in the south to Trieste, they get a master's degrees and they never ever go back to their home country. No, it is somehow built in the program, it's the philosophy of the programs, and it's also responsibility these young scientists learn. Well, you got a chance, so bring something back to your home country. And last, but certainly not least, TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences, and Romain Murenzi is also here and will also be speaking later on this great program, which brings me just to another remark about the importance of academies. And when I look at this great publication, Science Diplomacy, read it every time. It's great, not only because also UNESCO has an article in here, the Human Variant Project. No. It's also very timely, building a lasting Cuba-US bridge. I mean, how more timely could you actually be? Congratulations. But also here, I think there are two articles on the importance of academies, academic societies in science diplomacy. So, yes, it is a great publication. Shared resources. Again, I was not exhaustive on the institutions, programs, and networks, but I think you get somehow the idea how diverse the portfolio of programs and networks is, where UNESCO is either a founder, a partner, a co-founder, or a mentor. Shared resources. I think when you share resources, this is a kind of a potential both for advancement but also for conflicts. And I just like to highlight two examples here. One is Transboundary and shared water resources. We host this huge international hydrological program. It's in its 8th phase. And between 14 and 18 now, water security is a topic. And transboundary waters, and I'm getting actually very passionate about these transboundary aquifers. There are many around, and I'm not sure how many people are actually really aware of how much water underground, invisible, unseen, is actually running across borders, and how much conflict that could cause. So, for example, what you see here on this image, this is an atlas of transboundary aquifers of around the world. And you see, I mean, we have them everywhere, and we also have them in zones which are in conflict right now. I would just like to point out one of our Category 2 centers, which was recently established in Sweden on water cooperation. And they actually use now water diplomacy, or not science diplomacy, but this is specifically water diplomacy to address water security, and both water diplomacy, but also a multi-level governance of these transboundary, these shared aquifers, as a way of managing what does not belong just to one, but has to be sort of like managed by more. And this Category 2 center, and this is another remark I would like to make, is part of a network of around 300 UNESCO science-related chairs, now in social sciences and in natural sciences, but is also part of a network of over 50 Category 1 and 2 centers. Category 2 centers are centers out there in the world which are linked to to UNESCO. They do work which are in line with the strategy set by the member states of UNESCO. And so this newly established Category 2 center in Sweden in 2014 dedicates now particularly to the topic of water diplomacy. And training was mentioned also, I think, also by Roche Holt with the executive training program TWAS and AAAS. So like the underlying philosophy here is the UNESCO IHB project, PCCP, There is potential for conflict, but before it becomes conflict, it is also cooperation potential. And I think, again, here it is science diplomacy at its best, that we're really trying before we have a conflict, that we can actually turn this potential into cooperation. So it is really mainstreaming of water diplomacy, but also what we call preventive diplomacy into all the concept of IHP projects. And this particular training program takes place at UNESCO IHE in Delft. Another one, just shortly, and I'm really crazy about networks. I think networks are really the savior of the world, it seems to me, is the transboundary biosphere reserves. This is the map of all our biosphere reserves, over 600 in 119 countries. And you see here the map of 10 binational biosphere reserves, so 2 countries share the biosphere, so this is a shared resource. But we also have 4 trinational transboundary biosphere reserves. You see, I mean, they're more or less focused on Central and Eastern Europe, but we find 2 in Africa, and we have also on the American continent one. And obviously, if 3 countries have to share resources, have to discuss how to protect biodiversity, obviously you have to manage this somehow. And this is also that in all our programs where we have shared resources, that we do actually put a lot of emphasis on governing, appropriate governing mechanisms, and you just see some here. I mean, it always has to be a multi-governance approach where you have the local people involved, you have a national government, but you also have, in this case, maybe belonging to MAP, sort of like a global governance. It has to be a structure which includes all the stakeholders, the scientists, the government, the NGOs, the local communities, the private sector, because at the very end, all these sites, they should benefit to the local people. You require people and money, obviously, devoted to this function, and you have on all of the sites involved, you have to have dedicated people. I think it really also comes down to dedicated people, including scientists, to move these shared resources, the conflict potential which actually lies within shared resources, to turn this into cooperation potential. The last one, and this is also because very sadly, obviously, it's very current with the tragic events and the earthquake in Nepal, is the reducing earthquake losses networks. And now here, the shared resources between the country in red is actually sort of like a seismic property. It is a seismic risk. They all share a risk of an earthquake. And here, this is now what you see here is the Eastern Mediterranean region. This is Relemer. We have similar networks, obviously, in South Asia and in Central Asia. So the shared resource is not only the shared water or the shared biodiversity we'd like to protect. It could also be a shared risk among countries, and when you look at the red countries, again, I mean, these are some countries usually not sitting around the same table and talking to each other. I come to the last part, science policy society interface. Obviously, it is important for scientists to talk to politicians. And where are laws and regulations done? In parliaments. And so UNESCO launched this initiative of interparliamentary forums on STI, where we really looked at how do we have to talk to people who work in parliaments, and how is the cooperation also maybe from members of parliaments from different ministries, how can they better cooperate on STI? Another one which sort of like now draws a broader attention is obviously the World Science Forum, taking place every 2 years, where again science comes together with politicians, NGOs, and when you look at the people and the organization behind the success of this forum, obviously again this is a great mix of policy and science coming together. And the next next one is going to take place in November in Budapest, and it's called The Enabling Power of Science, and I hope to see you there during these days. The International Year of Lights, the International Years, and in this case 2015, it's the International Year of Light, is obviously also a great instrument to reach out to the media, to reach out to the broader public, but also to reach out to governments, politicians. And in this case now with the International Year of Light, I mean, it is really, the idea is to acknowledge and sharing the importance of light and light-based technologies, and also sort of like to promote and to support the technology transfer to areas, to societies and cultures which are limited in their development just by the sheer lack of access to light. World Science Day for Peace and Development, always on the November 10th of each year. Another tool to reach out to society, because I mean, if the electorate does not understand how important education and science is, the electorate is not going to elect that member of parliament which is actually fighting for the right type of regulations and legal framework which would promote education, STEM education and science. And here, but also, I mean, this is also with the World Science Day, is very much focused at young people. Science informing policy, and so it's not only reading science and diplomacy here. Here is just, I mean, this is not the whole, whole library of UNESCO reports to inform scientists, decision makers, governance. With the UNESCO Science Report, certainly one of our flagship publications, a new one should come out this fall. We have also reports on water development, obviously, the World Social Science Report. We should have next year a first edition of a World Ocean Science Report. And the one in the middle, Mapping Research and Innovation, I think is really one of our innovative publications, and I really hope it will gain track also when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs, because GoSpin sort of like maps the current research and innovation landscape and capacity in one given particular country. So it draws the baseline for where and how to develop the SDI framework in a country. When it comes to science and when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to use all the brains available, I mean, I have to talk about women in science. It's not going to take long, but we're really this great program, L'Oréal UNESCO for Women in Science. These are 5 outstanding scientists. They're always chosen from all areas of the world, because some of the science awards, the usual ones, I guess, they lack a little bit really the global scope of laureates, winners, awardees. So the goal is to recognize women's contribution to science and also to encourage young women. There are role models out there. There are these great women doing science and raising a family, having a relationship, sometimes maybe a little bit turbulent and complicated, but it is possible to combine a great and excellent scientific career with family life. And I mean, it's also a great example of a public-private partnership together with L'Oréal. We had so far now a network of 87 eminent women distinguished scientists. A scientist is somehow missing here. 2 of them became actually Nobel laureates after they had won this award, not before, after. So I mean, it's just to show, I mean, these are not just your average scientists somewhere. I mean, these are top world scientists which are chosen. I must also greatly thank AAAS, which is supporting us here for the US national program. And I think even more important is the 2,253 by this year promising young women scientists. They're out there, they are a network, they are aware of the importance for science, for development, and for their country or their society. My last point is on the UN Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board, which was called upon now 2 years ago. It was an initiative by the Secretary General because I think he wanted also to make the statement that science for development, science for climate change, science for the post-2015 agenda is extremely important. This is just the latest picture we have. You don't see the whole board, but this was the SAB roundtable last week on STI as a critical means of implementation for the SDGs. This was held at UN headquarters I think last Wednesday. And with the Scientific Advisory Board, I mean, you have these really independent experts. I mean, see this on the left side. And their deliverables so far, I must say, I mean, it's a year and a half. We're going into the second year with this board. They have policy briefs to the Secretary General, but they're all public. Obviously, on climate change, they will have a new one now for COP21. On data revolution, another big issue. Then also on the science in the context of high-level political forums, so really addressing the science policy interface, means of implementation, and other great global challenges. With this, some reflections on the way forward. UNESCO, the natural science sector, as a lead, is now in discussion and working with the European Commission on a new initiative, Science Diplomacy at Work. I think it would also be very important and crucial to enlarge executive training opportunities. I mean, we have this great initiative by TWAS and AAAS, and obviously UNESCO is ready and willing to partner up to look into how can we enlarge this. And I'd like to add here one comment. I think it was not sure now anymore whether it was Juan or Rush, but I think we also have to somehow look at the science of science diplomacy so that we also can make sure which are actually the best ways and means to use science diplomacy. And something I also realize the longer I work in this area, that science diplomacy takes place within a multi-stakeholder, I would say, polylogue. This is not a dialogue anymore, and I think this is also a challenge. It's not just the scientists and the politicians sitting around the table. I mean, you have the private sector, you have NGOs, you have civil society. Now we are asked to include indigenous and knowledge, local knowledge representatives. So this is a very diverse polylogue, and it has to be managed, and it has to be fairly managed, which comes back to the question of governance, where I think also AAAS can actually play a great role. Again, we're working in the framework of post-2015 agenda and COP21, and I personally hope we will have a legally binding result in Paris in December, but I'm not sure whether this is going to come about. This is the decision of the member states, and I hope to see you all again in one role or another at the AAAS Science Diplomacy Meeting Conference in 2016. Thank you very much for including UNESCO. Thank you for cooperation.